So my name is Sonia George. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership, and I am really honored and very happy to have four amazing ladies here with us this afternoon to discuss a very important topic, not just for community networks and for this audience here at the event, but really for the entire digital ecosystem. And this session is called Gender Rights and Meaningful Access within Communities of Practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. What are gender rights in digital, in the digital ecosystem? What does it mean to think about gender rights when we talk about meaningful access? And especially when we talk about meaningful access in a community context. And different communities, what kind of context do they have? And how do we need to be sensitive to those different situations, everything from culture, social norms, geography, socio-status, etc. But all of it that affect the intersectionality of women's lives. So I'm going to start with a very general question for all of them, not just to introduce some of their work, but especially to tell us one example in how they work to empower women in the context of meaningful access in their work. So let's start with Jenny, if that's okay. So Jenny, please. Do you have a mic? And I'm sorry if I'm standing, I hope you don't mind, but I'm not a quiet person, as you can probably guess. And so I like to move, and it's very hard for me to just stay seated, so I'll sit eventually. So Jenny, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. It's quite difficult for me to actually speak about, with the limited experiences I have, that what I have done with people sitting here with a lot more experience working with the community for years. As a researcher, I think what we've been doing is also to document the narratives of women being not connected, and in a way also questioning the way policy works, right? Like it works through numbers. Okay, these many women are excluded. These many women don't have mobile phones. But what research that way helps us understand is that it's not just that women don't have a mobile phone. When they have a mobile phone, it's the children or the husband use it, or they don't have time to use the mobile phone, or they don't have the money to recharge the mobile phone. So that is, one work within the larger interventions where I place research in, that you actually bring out the lived realities of women to the front, and from there start policy making and discussions. So, I mean, that kind of narrative research of everyday life of women is where I see as a concrete place where we can, start with, yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Sowmya, I think that's a perfect segue to you next, because you work also with communities directly. How do you relate to that experience that Jenny just shared? I think we have to share.
Thank you. I totally agree with Jenny. There is no doubt. It's not just about whose hand holds the machine, or whether it's the kids or the husband. I think essentially or even the recharge. I think there is, in a patriarchal system, fear of a woman getting independent. And the mobile phone in many ways has brought independence for women. You're able to access information, you're able to communicate beyond just the four walls of your house. Many women have become entrepreneurs, the ones who've really taken a risk. I think it is that fear. So if you actually look at rural communities, the Barefoot College runs what is known as village learning centers. And these are mostly digital learning centers because we have tablet PCs, and computers that children can actually access. And most of the people who actually turn up at those VLCs are young women. So I was very curious. In my first year, I said, why is it that we have more young women coming and the boys don't come? So one was, of course, that they try to have 2 shifts. So the boys come at a different time than the women, because there's a fear that if they mingle, then there will be other kind of problems. But the girls were actually using the VLCs to access documents related to UPSC, to State Public Service Commission, to teachers, the ads related to teachers, or just enrolling for courses. 2 or 3 of them got into the Merchant Navy, things that they wouldn't have been able to do. So I said, don't you have access at home? And they said, no, my parents would much rather buy it for the boy, because they see him as, this is my future. He's going to take care of me. This girl's going to get married and go away. Why should I invest in a future? So it's an entire mindset, along with, if I empower her, she's not going to go and be a doormat in her husband's house. She's going to start asking questions. So it's better to hand over a doormat than hand over a pataka, it's just like a cracker. So it's a whole mindset. And so it's both stories running parallelly, that the minute you give a young woman access to technology, you see a change in her. But within families, there is still that resistance to giving the device into the girl child's hand, because what if she runs away? What if she ends up falling in love? What if she, if she does something wrong? Questions they do not ask the boy. So it's a very inherent, and I'm sure this happens across the globe. I'm sure this is not specific to India. It happens in different ways, but it's also a very soft way of establishing control.
And that's exactly why we call this session Gender Rights, right? And when we think about gender rights, it's about power relationships and all of these different ways in which social norms and other parts of our society are really dictating the way women, are forced to behave, are imposed behaviors, etc. So it will be great to hear from our colleague from Mongolia, Nari. Do you face a similar situation in Mongolia? And what, for you, from your work, can you share that might be different, might be similar? Tell us a bit more about your experience.
Hello everyone. I'm Nari. I represented Cloud Academy in Mongolia. Thankfully, in Mongolia, all person has access to use smartphones, smart computer, etc. In Mongolia, there's only one struggle we're facing is women who don't believe their potential. It is we're working on. The Cloud Academy internet access has opened up countless opportunities for women. Many are now gaining tech skills in field like IT, project management, or digital entrepreneurship through free or affordable online platforms, career that once felt out of reach, and we're working on that.
Thank you. Great. So, Chinmayi, you not only work here in India, but I think through the work of IT for Change, you're also very aware and very connected to the experiences of women in other parts of the world. And I think it's really an interesting contrast, right? Even just the way Jenny and Sowmya speak about the challenges here in India and how Nari really expresses the experience in a very different way. What is your perspective on that? And based on what you know, your experience with your communities, but also, if you don't mind, I also wanted to ask you if you can place it in the context of justice. We're talking about gender rights, and the exercise of rights, it's about the exercise and the enjoyment of justice, right? Of being able to be a free human being, to live in a just society. Is that a reality that you see, not just in India, but across Asia, in your studies, in your research and analysis?
Thanks, Sonia. I would like to start by talking about the community end of it, which has been my direct experience more than the research and the advocacy bit. So IT for Change has a field center called Prakriye, and we operate in Mysore and 60 villages across Mysore. Like Sowmya said, we also have information centers. And these information centers are actually owned and run by women from the community itself. So I want to talk about two examples and situate the question about justice within these two examples. So one is Gauramma, who is a tribal woman living in a tribal hamlet, who has to survive by depending on the state rations. And when her rations stopped because her fingerprint didn't work and she didn't know how to ensure that the biometric works, she didn't know who to turn to. And she lives alone, and her son's a migrant worker, so who should she go to? And there's another case of a young widow, and she has 2 children and an elderly father-in-law who is very weak. And she desperately needs a job for her livelihood. So if you look at both of these women, and the Sakhi who manages the information center, who is also from the same community, has been able to bridge the access gap. And I mentioned 2 women, not to contrast their context, Gauramma, who does not have a phone, who does not live near a city, who is not literate, versus the young widow who is actually literate and has spoken to the Sakhi over the phone and, has explained the context. It's not really the contrast in their contexts, but the fact that the information is important. The Sakhi was able to navigate it, not just with the piece of information, but also the facilitation around it, right? So how do you make sure that that information is contextual and is situated such that it empowers you? So the power from the information itself is only one piece of the puzzle, but strategically placing it so that it empowers the women is the bigger part of the meaningful access. So the meaningful access, we see it not just as access to connection or connectivity or an affordable device, but it's really how do you make it appropriate, local, contextual. So for example, how did the Sakhi handle the access? She knows that Gauramma's son is a migrant worker and is in another village. Her biometrics is not working. She was able to negotiate with the CSC and organize a camp in Gauramma's village and bring the CSC to the village because Gauramma obviously cannot, she cannot go to the CSC center. Similarly with Kavya, who is a young widow, she was able to remember that Kavya is a widow and she needs a job. So when an Anganwadi job opened up, she's able to connect these 2 pieces of information and context and say, Kavya, why don't you apply? And encouraged her to apply. So the encouragement is as important to the piece of information itself. So connecting back to, the patriarchal system. Looking at information as this public good and situated in the hands of the women. So I think that's where the justice comes from.
Actually, I want to come back to Chinmayi because we were talking about with the last audience member about building the gender elements by design, which I think it's something that you have a lot of experience with. So share with us how you've integrated that to address some of these challenges that the communities face. Thank you.
Yeah. To begin with, when you look at the information ecosystem, the people who are at the margins are women, and within that, the intersectionalities of caste, religion, and so on. So we began by saying that we want to put the women at the center of the information ecosystem. So which is why we started by looking at women's collectives and the information systems information centers being owned by these women. So how do you ensure ownership when you clearly know that when you walk into a village, the power is so skewed towards the other end? So then the process has to be very conscious and proactive in making sure that there are spaces where these can be negotiated. So for example, when we go into the village and say, so we call for a meeting with the women first, the collectives, and then they call for a women with the power leaders in the village. So one example where so the women were trying to navigate for a space for the information center with the panchayat leaders. And the panchayat leaders said, yes, this is great, please bring the information center to our village and we'll give you a space in the center of the village. Most of these were Dalit women and their streets are at the edge of the village. So, this dialogue went back and forth for a while, and one of the women got up and said, when we wanted a space for our Sanghamane, like the house for a collective, you said it's your issue, it's your center, you keep it in your street. Now when we want to bring an information center to the village and you see its benefit, you want it in the center. We want to keep it in our Sangha house. Why can't this become the center for you all? Why can't you come to us? So the women were able to actually navigate this, and today the center runs in the collective house. So that was one battle. Next, when we said, who should manage and who should run the center? Who should be the agent, the intermediary? And immediately everybody will think of a young man, right? Like a literate, college-going or, degree holder. And we said, no, it has to be a young woman. And that places a lot of responsibility, a lot of risk also, because this young woman is very vulnerable in a position in a village. So then the women support her, so both psychologically and socially, and the organization also in building her capacities and her confidence to be able to manage this. And it's a constant negotiation and navigation, but over the years, we've seen that you get the ball rolling and then that support system just acquires more and more power. So so these are two examples.
Thank you, that's great. So can I ask one of the organizers to do a time check for me, please? There were a lot of people that stood up and that stayed standing, basically telling us, thinking about these issues, right? That you are all considering gender issues, gender concerns in your practice as community network, community leaders. But one thing is that we all have different contexts, right? Each experience is unique, and I want to hear from a few more of you. But before we go back to the audience, I wanted to go back to Jenny and Sowmya and ask you, based on your experience and some of the things that you expect, what are some of the kind of key elements, the key components, having a gender transformative approach to community-centered solutions that you feel that without those elements, we're just not going to move the needle, as people like to say? Let's start with you, and then we'll go to you with the same question, because I think you have similar experiences. Do you have the mic next? Yeah. And then we'll come back to you, so prepare.
I completely agree with what somebody said about thinking about gender from the designing stage itself. For example, when DEF has been doing training, in digital literacy for women, one issue the people who are doing it faced was that women were not turning up, and we were planning half a day session, a full day session, and they have housework. So, it is not possible to have women an entire day. So you then break down the training. Another way we then thought of it is that why don't we just have in the budget itself, add wages for a child care person who would take care of the children while the women are doing the training. And, that would take care of the fact that women are engaged in housework, but then when they are coming for the workshop, there is someone to take care of them. So I feel these smaller things which only people who have a first-hand experience of it would be mindful of including. I cannot imagine a man thinking about that, having a child care and while giving digital literacy. So I think that to involve more women, and I completely, agree with that even when we're speaking about gender, that gender is a spectrum, so is different identities. Experience of an Adivasi woman who do not have connectivity because a dam was built there years back and the geography was altered and now there's no way to reach there. The issues of connectivity that women would be facing would be so different from, an urban woman who still have access and, the means to afford internet, but the parents think that, that would hurt the caste endogamy, that, they'll fall in love and then marry someone outside the caste. So to even not to look at it as a single lens issue, but to even acknowledge that there are identities interacting and power structure, layers of power structure creating these identities. So to be mindful of that while designing programs and then implementing programs would be, an ideal way. Yeah.
Thank you. Sowmya, did you want to add 1 or 2 points, and then we'll go back to the audience?
I think to begin with, the fact that you are involving women itself is something where, that should become a non-negotiable. There is no question of not being able to find a woman. The minute you make an excuse and say, "Acha, we are not finding women, so let's just settle for the young boy next door," it doesn't work. And again, I agree with Jenny. It depends on where you're located and the kind of history of the place. So for instance, Karnataka would be very different from, say, Gujarat, would be very different from, say, Maharashtra or Rajasthan. I remember literally 28 years ago when I went and started working in Rajasthan, it was a completely different place. I was told, I was coming out of a university, I was told, please don't come and wear jeans and t-shirts and please wear Indian clothes and preferably a sari or maybe a salwar kameez. I'd never owned salwar kameezes in my life until I started working in rural India. But today I go back 28 years later to Rajasthan, and young rural girls, even little 5-year-old kids to school, are wearing jeans and t-shirts, and that gender barrier in clothes has been broken. And I think technology has its ups and downs. It has been an enabler in many ways. It's also been a blocker in many ways. It depends on in whose hand the technology really is. But I feel if it is in the hands of a woman, she would definitely think of her own type first. And if it's in the hands of a man, he'll think from his perspective. And I feel that's what's made a difference. In fact, how many women are involved in actually designing technology is a bigger question. It's not just the end user being a woman. How many women sitting in any of these big companies that are, churning out app after app after app, how many of them engage women? How many of them actually have that bent of mind to say, no, let's look at it from the gender lens, let's look at it from a woman's lens. And a lot of technology would actually change. In fact, I think security features would change if it was in the hands of a woman as opposed to being in the hands of a man. And I can say that very safely and confidently.
Thank you. So I think all the speakers make really powerful points. I want to give you a chance to, 7 minutes left. I want to give you a chance to ask questions, but if you don't have a question, I also want to give you a chance to, if you have an experience that hasn't been shared yet, We talked about including women in the design, in the thinking about women's realities when planning training, programs, projects, lots of different things that all of them talked about. Nari also talked about the numbers of women participating in different kinds of training and activities. Have you done something that hasn't been said that we could hear from you, we could learn from you? Or do you have a question for these amazing women thinkers?
I have a question, and the question is, if I were to start a practical community engagement of women, for the context, I teach women English to women who are above 50. So they don't, so I have to go to the very basic, and these are Muslim women, because that's what I can understand, because my mom is of the same age. So if they learn English, still they have the concept that they don't have to talk outside. So the mindset is like, I don't deserve to do this. So since everyone is here talking about inclusivity, I just wanted to ask, how do you address the mindset change, or what is that as a person I can do to contribute for the inclusion? We had one Sangha woman, a rural woman, non-literate, who was very interested in making films. We were making films with them, and she wanted to learn how to make it. And so there was one occasion where she was traveling with the group outside of her village to actually Delhi. So in that circumstance, we asked her, do you want to, capture this on video? And she came into the office for a day to learn how to shoot. And we realized that she came up with her own terms. The record is like a bindi. The record button's like a bindi. And then when it turns to sharp corners is when you stop. And so on. There were other things that she evolved. For us, the learning was that you really need to respect their lived experience and not really, place it in a hierarchy of education versus experience. Their lived experience is something to be respected, and to also constantly articulate that, that this knowledge that you already have is very, very, significant, empowering, and so on. So, so listen, observe, and reinforce this. Is one tip, and I think that's also part of the checklist. Second thing is, when she made a movie and then we made a movie on her and then we did screenings in the village, we saw that when you take stories from among their context and you show it to other women, that's more inspiring than an external, like a language coming in and telling them something. So role models work very well, yeah.
Thank you, go ahead.
Again, my own insight into your predicament is that you just need to give them time. You're giving them a skill. That skill should not come with an agenda or with whatever, with an attachment that you have to use it. Trust me, at some point, when push comes to shove and they are in a situation where they have to use the language, it's going to come and flow. So you just need to work towards that. I mean, you can't create a scenario. It'll happen. But I think somewhere the fact that they are engaging, coming, learning is what you should be happy and concentrate on. If they were not interested, they would say, get lost, I'm not interested. They won't invest their time. I mean, a woman's time is premium. Yeah, she has 300 things to do. This is just one part of it. But the fact that they're learning shows that there is an initiative. Just need to give them time.
So when designing the projects from the beginning, looking at the perspective of the gender balance, what are the toolkits or the checklist that you will suggest, the team will suggest for us to incorporate in our programs?
So my query is around when you have a community engagement or some kind of project, what kind of measures do you look at for extending its impact out over the longer term? Is there sort of further engagement with the people who are involved in these programs? And looking beyond that as well, have you had much success or efforts at sort of fostering those links between the participants that you've supported so that they can also assist each other moving forward?
And that comes to your question, which is no community engagement can be short-lived or can be, time-bound. It's not like you go in, you teach, you get out. It's a continuity. I mean, I work with an organization that's had a relationship with the area where they work for 50 years. And that's the kind of trust you need to build. You can't be a fly-by-night operator, come, do your gig and walk off and say, do you deal with whatever the outcomes are. You need to be there. In fact, one of the things that has been something that I really look forward to working on is one part is digital divide, but where people are getting into, say, digital banking, they don't understand the magnitude of the fraud that they can actually face. I've seen rural people getting wiped out. One message, they get a call, they get scared, they press a number, and they're asked for their Aadhaar number. Next second, they know their entire life saving is wiped out, and they don't know how to deal with it. So technology, it's not just enabling a person to understand how to negotiate and use technology, but also how to defend yourself from the misuse of technology, which is all around us. So I think it's a continuous process. There's never a full stop button, according to me, to it.
Yeah. I mean, I have a mother who keeps asking questions too. I sometimes don't have the patience. The way she talks about it is that when she was young, there were older women who could not read the boards of buses, where the bus is going. So they would come and ask her, and they get this question repeatedly in a bus stand. At one point, they run out of patience, and they're like, you're just like me at that point of time. And yeah, I mean, I also feel that, women don't have avenues for peer learning, right? So it is the daughter who has to teach. Whereas for men, they'll go sit in a shop, they'll learn from each other, they share the information. There's a way of collectively learning things.
A collective brotherhood.
Yeah. Women don't have it. So it's very individualized learning, which is anyway very difficult to take a load on. So I feel like let's not, take guilt in individually not being helpful, but building that community and peer spaces where they can learn collectively and enjoy it. Leisure it's not just about education, filling a form, getting jobs. Watching a movie is okay. Yeah, so that has to be built in all the interventions, that having fun is okay for women too. So I think, yeah.
Thank you.